Hi and welcome to Daily Chess. This time I'm going to present you the game between Vladimir Kramnik and Daniel Fridman from the Sparkassen chess meeting 2013. Yeah, this game is probably known or will be known for Kramnik's interesting sacrifice. I'm sure this game will be included in some books dedicated to practical sacrifices. As we see, Kramnik sacrificed pawn in exchange even, simply in order to open up lines and to set practical difficulties and problems to his opponent, which Fridman, after all, didn't manage to solve. And without being able to solve them, he collapsed. I don't even, maybe even due to time pressure, but it was just a brilliant display of how, yeah, important is to keep a practical approach to the game. After all, we don't play correspondence game. So c4, e6. The Kramnik can play almost every opening. He uses e4 rather rarely. He plays mainly first d4, but also sometimes knight f3 in order to be more flexible to avoid certain systems like Benoni or something like this. And he has a very big good expert here on the English opening as well. And Daniel Fridman certainly knew this, and he's a very solid player, like most of the Germans there. Daniel Fridman, Igor Kenkin, and so on. George Meyer. So very solid players, and he plays a Queen's Gambit declined against d4, and certainly hoped that Kramnik would transpose into this opening. For instance, after knight f3, d5. And if he now chooses, or had chosen, d4, then we certainly are in the Queen's Gambit declined. And after knight f6, probably g3, the Catalan, an opening in which Kramnik has a huge experience with both black and white. And I'm not sure if Fridman would have liked to test him there, but maybe that was his main part of his preparation. But b3 keeps the game in the so-called Reti realms. White doesn't want to push d4 because it's rather committing. Black might get some play with c5, and it's simply keeping the position more flexible, and it isn't that committing as playing d4 straight away. So b3 simply prepares development as well as d4 would have to do, and therefore bishop b2 is the idea to put this bishop here on a long diagonal. And quite often both bishops are developed, which is the so-called double fianchetto. Knight f6, g3, here we go. Bishop e7, bishop g2, simply finishing kingside development. And now come concrete action, a first critical moment. How should black play and how should he arrange his pieces? Well, certainly you're said or told that you should put your pieces behind the pawns. So c5 is an option. Playing c5, then knight c6, but you always have the issue with this bishop here. Now the pawn on e6, limited scope, can only reach d7, can't go further. The push e6, e5 is currently not available. Even after knight c6 as a preparation, bishop b2 comes, controlling the square once again and preventing e5. So that's black's main problem, how to develop this bishop here. One idea is to fianchetto it, but in doing so it's very slow. This plan takes some time, probably especially if you aim to put a pawn on c5, then b6, then knight c6, then bishop b7, for example. It takes some time to do this, and white simply enjoys slight lead in development then. You just need 1 and 2 moves in order to finish his development. Black needs 1, c5, b6, bishop there, and the knight out. So white could try to use this time to get something meaningful. And Kramnik decided after c5, bishop b2, knight c6, d4 would, black's lack in development, let's put it like this, could be felt after e3. and black cannot play e5 because the center is not stable enough. And I think after knight c6, now e5 would be an idea. He plays e takes d4, c takes d4, d3, e5, rook e1, bishop e4, knight bd2. And despite the position being a bit rather unclear, I think that yeah, white's simply much better here. Or not much better, let's put slightly better in a way. I mean, he doesn't have anything concrete, but this pawn is always a weakness. And the main task is to prevent it from advancing. This is vital, probably, for white. And if he manages to prevent this advance, then the pawn on e5 is just a permanent weakness. I mean, okay, black has certain space here. I mean, he controls two important squares, especially this bishop here is currently, out of play. But after something like, I don't know, queen c2, a3, b4, and so on, this bishop might later on come to life. I mean, even if this pawn here, once this pawn falls, the bishop has a certain task here. You could even consider a4 and bishop a3 or something like this. Now, but later on, it's important to break this pin here on this knight in order to free him and to put him in this nice blockading square. Also, a plan of knight g5 and then e4. Simply control this square might be an option, but okay, that's something very concrete. Fridman chose to play knight c6. It's okay, not just to stabilize the center, and maybe even planning to play d4 and e5 now, securing a space advantage. Therefore e3 comes. And again, if he pushes e4, we just exchange it off, and we have a similar position. Actually, the same position. An idea might have been here to play d takes c4, just altering the structure immediately after b takes c, queen d3. The difference compared to the game where b6 was played is that now the idea of knight e1 is not possible because, or it's possible, but it just hangs the pawn because the knight is not hanging there, and therefore he probably has to go for b3 and rook d8, rook d1. And if he takes a takes b, I think white has certain play. I mean, he can push d4, he controls e5. He might have even play on the semi-open a file, so I guess that's a small push here. After b6, we actually see that if he plans to take here on c4, this diagonal now is open, which means that after knight c3, d takes c4, b takes c4, similar to the line we just checked. Queen d3 is just a loss of time, and actually, in a way, just a mistake. I mean, white gets pressure for free, and after knight e1, he has even an extra option of playing f4, which might even be the start of a kingside operation. Okay, the idea is here simply that, in a way, it's a discovered attack, because after queen takes c4, the knight would fall to rook b8. White's just a pawn up, piece up for a pawn, which is definitely better for him. Therefore, Fridman went back. It's surprising that he played this line. I mean, he certainly should have analyzed and calculated it. I mean, it's obvious that knight e1 is an idea, especially after b6. I mean, at least it weakens the structure. And I think instead of queen d3, bishop b7 would have been much better. Now the idea of queen d3 is quite serious. Therefore, white probably has to take measures to prevent it. Queen e2, queen c7. For instance, now knight b5, queen d7, rook after d8, just kicking the knight back. And black has a very solid position. I mean, it's true. White might have some initiative here based on d4 and some concrete center actions, but in a game Akopian against Georgiev and Khanty-Massivsk 2013, the game ended in a draw later on, and black had a very solid position here. Might have been better, but after queen d3, it was just a loss of time. Queen e2, bishop b7, and now f4. Now using the additional option, black gave to white, and immediately trying to execute it, playing f4, now gaining space, putting the piece behind the pawns. It's just classical principles. Rook after d8 to keep pressuring the d2 pawn, which is right now our weakness. rook d1, okay. And it's very interesting, no? He cannot really penetrate anywhere. I mean, he controls the d file, the semi-open d file, but he cannot penetrate. He cannot go to d6 here with the queen. I mean, d5 is controlled, d4 is controlled, d3 is controlled, d2 is controlled. So it's rather passive, this setup. I mean, certainly okay, it binds certain pieces, but it's not enough. I mean, if okay, knight b4, rather brute approach, you know, just trying to go to d3, and once the knight goes there and is able to stay there, even black will certainly have enough counter chances to maybe even be slightly better. But without this, it's just not enough. Okay, d3, bishop g2, and okay, one interesting idea would have been, of course, to take himself, but Kramnik thought, okay, that Fridman would like to exchange off pieces. I mean, after all, he has a bit less space here, especially with the pieces here, and the bishop needs a certain diagonal to operate on, and therefore this knight might maybe even go later, maybe to c6, c7, after e5, maybe to e6, something like this might have been an idea, and therefore he frees these pieces a bit. And the reason Kramnik played d3 was probably that after bishop takes g2, he didn't intend it to take with the king, because then he would be exposed to all kind of checks, you know, b7, c6 at an appropriate moment, and this might be very, very annoying for white, who has to always consider this moves in his calculations. Therefore, knight takes g2. Queen takes g2 was maybe also an idea, but yeah, the reason is that despite being attacking this pawn 3 times, the lineup simply wrong, the setup. He needs the queen on d8 and the rook on d7 to really execute some pressure, because yeah, this rook and this knight does a very good job in defending it, because what black would have to sacrifice in exchange if he tries to hit this pawn. So knight takes g2, and this is actually kind of interesting, because he basically plans to attack. I mean, f5, because right now this knight is very passive here. We can go to h4, f3, and so on. But if he plans to go to f3, he might have stayed on e1 and go to f3 immediately. Therefore, I guess he plans simply to play f5 later on, and to secure this post on f4, and later maybe ideas of h5, and so on for his knight. So it's a very, very interesting approach, and yeah, kind of thinking, you know. And especially after, let's say, if it's white to move, he has a free move here. Let's give it to him. If he plays f5 and he counters it with e5, also not trying to bolster this pawn here, he might probably just go for e4, and if the knight goes to d5, this whole lineup here is just useless. Giving a check is also very, very dangerous because of the king h1. If he goes for this, he always have a pin here. I'm not sure if maybe it might be playable, but it looks very, very dangerous, especially since something like knight d1 seems to just win the piece here. Therefore, even if after king h1, white just has a big threat playing knight d5. Discovered attack against the queen, which has no space, and it's like a cage here, you know, where she trapped. And yeah, therefore okay, a6, you know, just okay, pushing him back here, a6, a3, knight c6, and now this pawn structure here is certainly known from the English opening here, c4, d3, e3, and f4. And they control all the central squares here, you know, the yellow colored squares here, and it's quite interesting to see white keeping a total control over the center. And with it, you know, he cannot really move his pawns without creating additional weaknesses. Therefore, he tries to play on the king side here. You know, he's very well coordinated. This rook on a8 is still very passive. The only function he might certainly get is to play rook a7 to try to control some pawns in the 7th rank to defend them. But after g4, the game becomes very, very sharp. One has to say that Daniel Fridman is lower rated than Kramnik, and probably even has less experience than Kramnik, and this all might have been the reason why Kramnik played so aggressively in this game, despite being not sound. Probably, I don't know if this sacrifice was really sound, because after checking with the engine, The engine's very confident and thinks black's position is very promising, giving him almost a winning advantage later on. But in some lines it suddenly starts to change the evaluation, and yeah, we'll see some of these lines here. After h6, for example, g5, immediately hitting the pawn, or h6 is just a weakness, just gives us an attacking point. After it takes, knight h7. I thought g6 might have been interesting, because after f takes g, knight f4, g5, and knight g6, for example, or knight h5. This looks certainly very, very interesting and very dangerous for black. I mean, he has a very structural weakness here. 3 pawns, it might become targets. And yeah, but at h4 it's also very, very good. I think white has such a serious initiative here. But knight d8 is okay. I mean, he's considering already to defend. And now f5. With a very interesting idea. Probably not sound, but in spirit of time, setting practical problems to the opponent, which is also very, very relevant, as I learned recently. Knight d6 and f6. Yeah, f6. I mean, bishop takes f6 is probably a critical line. If you want to go be safe, probably maybe even g takes f6 is an idea. But I think after, yeah, if the knight moves here, the pawn is still attacked. So probably after g takes f, maybe something like knight a4 might be an interesting idea. Still hitting this pawn here. But after bishop takes f6, the only way to make progress is to sacrifice the exchange. G takes f, knight f4. Well, after this exchange, if we take a closer look at the position and try to figure out some details and nuances here, we can see that the most vulnerable spot is probably f6. Now, if the knight somehow manages to go to f6, he can fork the king and the queen. And especially with this bishop here eyeing those dark squares, and then maybe a queen maneuver, maybe f2, h4, and so on, black has to solve some problems. And I think they are mainly practical, because in a theoretical game, in a correspondence game, for example, I think the sacrifice might have been not very sound. But in a practical game, even with time pressure or something like this, practical considerations, and it's very dangerous and difficult to find your way and to maneuver through these complications. And I think it's very, very interesting, and yeah, probably just a masterpiece of practical sacrifice. So okay, if king f8, which might have been interesting, then maybe even slightly better, with the idea of knight h5, f5, and after knight f6, queen b7. I'm not sure. I mean, it looks very, very dangerous, especially after rook f1. White might still have an attack here. I know I might threaten to break it up here on g takes f5 and so on. So it's rather dangerous, and I mean, you have to be, you cannot play with the computer, so you have to calculate all the lines, and you have to be sure that you find everything over the board. And I think it's also very, very dangerous here for both sides. But this might have been an idea. Knight d5 is okay, but after knight h5, white simply gets on with this initiative. Queen e7 protecting f6, rook f1 attacking it, knight e7 protecting it. Here maybe queen f2 was also interesting, but well, okay. I mean, he still wants to keep his pieces on the board. Queen g2 and h6. b5 would have been probably stronger according to the engine, getting some counterplay, and yeah, putting casting depths about white's approach here. h4, king f8. Probably the decisive mistake here. Again, b5 was an option of just not to threaten to play b4 and c takes b, and then would push his pawns here. I mean, if black manages to hold white's attack, he can use his pawn majority there and try to generate play. So after knight e2, for instance, knight e8, knight e2, g3, I don't really see a way to continue much of his attack. I mean, even if he manages to take this pawn, he still has an exchange down, and probably Fridman just lost his nerves. King f8, queen g3. Now the position is very dangerous for black, probably even close to be lost. King e8, queen f4, very strong, hitting h6, and then threatening some stuff, you know. I mean, something like after king h8, queen h8, for example, check. Let's say queen f8 and knight g7 check or knight f6 check, something like this, you know. Very, very dangerous, yeah, lines which black had to calculate here, and it's very difficult to be on pressure and under pressure for a very long time. Queen f8, and now a brilliant move, a brilliant sacrifice, typical for all, usually for all the Sicilian. Knight d5. You know, the king is so squeezed by his own pieces that certainly a tactic has to be there. And yeah, this is just beautiful. After takes, bishop takes f6. In a way, just threatening knight g7 check, with where black has to go to take his queen, give his queen fork, prevent mate. Knight d5, creating d7 as a Luftloch. Queen takes c5, king d7. Now brilliant tactics. Bishop g7. The queen certainly lacks squares. If she goes to e8, knight f6 finishes her off. Well, same goes with queen g8. Again, the knight fork here. And well, if she goes here, knight f6 anyway, and the only piece to protect the queen is the king, but he cannot access e8, so he has to leave his queen. And after this, it's just over. I mean, yeah, there's not much to be said about this. Therefore, rook e8, and now knight f6, king c7. And it's a very, very interesting picture here because the queen doesn't have any squares left. So we just retreat. And white is winning. The queen cannot go to g8, cannot go to h8. She can only go either to e7, after which knight takes d5 forks king and queen, wins. Or she can take here, but after, very important, knight takes d5, check. The king goes somewhere. After queen takes g7, the king won't survive probably. I mean, he's very so squeezed here, and h6 is weak. f7 is weak. If the rook f6, the knight is pinned, then f7 might fall, and white has so much pressure, and also very, very dangerous pawns here. I mean, g4 might advance to g5 and so on. This looks very, very dangerous here for black, and it's just material which counts probably in the long run. I mean, even something like, I don't know, something like rook g8, you know, trying to go something like this, you know, with such a piece activity as white has, just tactics, takes, and just picking up the rook, and white wins. So it's a very, very interesting game, not purely chess-wise. I mean, the approach was not very sound probably. I mean, after b5, I would have liked to see how he defends, you know, and how he neutralizes black's play here. I mean, after knight e8, f6 is so strongly covered, so it would have been a miracle probably for Kramnik to save this game here. But well, it's a very interesting thing to see how a practical decision, a practical sacrifice, can count here. I mean, white sacrificed a pawn and an exchange just to open up one line, the g file, and to recreate a weakness on f6. And all white did was just to focus all his forces, okay, despite this move, all his forces on this square f6. And it's a miracle. I mean, it's just incredible that he managed to win this game. I mean, probably it wasn't very sound, but the way the game finished was probably remarkable. After queen a1, it's a brilliant move. Fridman resigned. Well, I hope you enjoyed this game recap here. It's probably one of the most beautiful games here in Dortmund this year. And yeah, if you like my commentary, if you like my ideas, the way I analyze this game, just leave a comment on my YouTube channel, Daily Chess TV, or subscribe there with your account. This would help me very much, and share this show to your chess friends, you know, on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and so on. You can follow me there as well. And don't forget to visit my website, www.dailychess.org, where you can find reviews, daily, probably just twice or twice per week. Some reviews, some book reviews or DVD reviews, or just related. So yeah. What else? Well, I would like to thank Chessbase and Schach Niggemann for supporting this show, as well as chesstempo.com, which I recommend for solving tactics. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.